Go.
Well, hello everyone and welcome. I'm Alison Watts. I'm here on behalf of the Southern Cross Postgraduate Association. I'm very happy to introduce this morning's workshop with Bec Brown on these are a series of postgrad masterclasses. So today's focus is on writing that winning cover letter and selection criteria. And this is a part of a series. I'll put up a link, Bec, in the chat box to next week's workshop as well, which is linked to this one, isn't it? The resume and LinkedIn.
Fits beautifully, that whole. Of course, the interview goes after that, but the two really go beautifully.
Sit well together. So thank you for everyone for coming along, and I'll hand it over to you, Bec. Thanks.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name's Bec Brown. I'm working in conjunction with the Postgraduate Association and SCU Careers team. And what I will do is I'll just pop up my slide and just introduce a little bit about what the SCU Careers team can do for you. We sometimes have one of the team, they're just not here this morning, come in and share. So I'm just going to pause the recording just for a second. It won't let me close this screen. So just one second. I'm just going to pop my slides up. So welcome, everybody. As I said, my name's Bec Brown. I am here in conjunction with Susie Grizel, who I'll do a little bit of just a bit of an intro as to what they do, and Alison Watts, who is hosting this wonderful series, and I feel really privileged to be here and have this time with you guys. So welcome, everybody. Welcome at home. We love it if you're listening at home. We love it also if you come along and just ask those questions and how we can help you. Before we get started, I'd love to just start with a welcome to country. So I acknowledge and pay my deepest respects to the ancestors, elders, and descendants of the land upon which we meet and study. I'm mindful that within and without the buildings, these lands were and always will be Aboriginal land. So before we kick off, I'd love to just introduce when Alice and I aren't here with you, SCU Careers is permanently here to help you, or there to help you. They're on each campus, but you can access, of course, remotely. Really importantly, careers appointments. They have amazing resume samples. So they have industry-specific samples. Next week, we're going to be doing resumes and LinkedIn, all of 2 hours of my top tips on how we're going to having winning cover letters and winning resumes and LinkedIn next week. But if you're not at that stage, and then later on, you think, oh, I've got to put that resume together, many of the principles of which I'll be talking about next week for your resume will be on just via this. They have a really good landing page, and you can really easily find there how to have an appointment. For you, actually, a few of you, Lewis, John, if after this series, the times that I offer don't suit you, to dive a little bit more deeply into, if you wanted to, how to bundle, your experience and communicate that experience, and, a little bit more clarity, direction. The SCU Careers team, they offer 30-minute appointments. I'll be doing 1 hour ones just for a short period. I think it's middle of November, but they're there for you all of the time. So they can, if the time frame that you get to the end of this series and you want that extra help, they can help you explore different careers, give you ideas for pathways, perhaps areas that you haven't really thought about yet in terms of, say, if we use the social work example, they may have some ideas of possible pathways, sectors of the industry, requirements, and anything in there that may be helpful for you. So also one of the wonderful things is really importantly on their service is that they can help you for 2 years after you graduate. So many students don't realise that. So what can happen is you find a grad position, off you go, and then, you know, things change, or you want to change, or you want to, you know, rebrand yourself, etc. They can help you make that next transition. So really, they're there to help with transitions. They can also do interview preparation. We're going to do interviews the week after next. And again, I'll show you, there's some tools that they have. They have a program called Interview 360 that you can use immediately, so you can practice your online interviews. So here we go. On to the cover letter. I am really, really excited. As you can see, I absolutely love my enthusiasm. I love what I do, and I love what I do because I love being able to share some simple and effective, not tricks, just understanding how to communicate yourself to the potential employer, because I'm so conscious that we probably have amazing graduates at home that so for example, in another setting recently, I asked a group of, I think there was about 10 people, whether they thought a cover letter was important, and most of them said no. And I'll tell you here today, but you obviously know because you're here, is that your cover letter is absolutely critical. So if they give you an option that says cover letter optional, I would always, and actually anytime they give you an optional to attach this, optional to it, just do it. Because if you get down to that final pile and they're like, okay, we've got to choose one in or out, they're going to take the one that's, you know, gone that step further. When talking about cover letters recently, this particular group of people, they were overwhelmed, I guess, with how much work is involved in a cover letter. So what I'll tell you with both the cover letter, your resume, your interview preparation, you can, that's just, you know, practicing it, practice. The setup, the time that you put into your cover letter and your resume, it takes a lot of time. But once you start getting hits on your fabulous new cover letter, and once you get clear, really clear about what work it is that you want, and then start channeling your activities towards that relentlessly, and you're on your way. So although what I share with you today might be just like, oh my God, it's something that you can chip away at, refine, and then once I say get a hit, once you send it off to somebody with your fancy new resume, then you know you're on your way, and there's sections of it that you can, so it will take you quite a long time to get it, or depending on how quickly you write and how much you've got already. But once you've got it, you can just, you know, keep it, save it, refine it over and over again. So don't be overwhelmed, I guess. I'm just preempting that it's like, oh God. Okay, so here are, you'll get a copy of all of these slides at the end. And what I'll do, which we did in the last series, is we just gathered everybody's names that enrolled in all of the workshops and sent them the whole series. Then we weren't sort of sending half of this and half of that. So you will get a copy of everything. So if you can't come along live, it can be good just to give yourself that 2 hours, so then you've kind of done it, because I know that I am going back to something's a lot harder than if you just kind of make the time. But it's up to you, whatever works with your time frame. Okay, so these are the things that it must have: your contact details, their contact details, the date, education, achievements, etc., etc. You can see all of that there. I'm going to show you what all of that looks like in action. Before we do that, I'd love to just, because I do talk a lot in that, because I've got so much I want to share, but I also don't want you to die of death by PowerPoint. So I'd love for you guys just to take a moment to either share with your mic. Anybody'd like to share with your mic? how have your cover letters been in the past? How confident do you feel? How generally, what's your feeling about your own cover letter process? Maybe you haven't written one for a long time. The good thing is not too much has changed in cover letter land. So if you had one from 10 years ago, of course, you know, you've got, and it was a good one, then, you know, there's some cutting and pasting to be done, but the principles, many of the principles haven't changed.
I'll jump in if
please do.
else is.
Yeah, thanks, Lewis.
So I have been in, I guess, my most current position now for the last 5 years, and it's just kind of got to the stage where I've realised I need a change. My personal circumstances have changed. Got 2 younger boys that I've kind of inherited, and now got another one on the way.
Congratulations.
So the idea of kind of working 45 hours and shift works and all that kind of stuff. I'm just starting to get to that point where I'm thinking, all right, time for a change. So I've kind of developed a cover letter over the last probably 12 months.
Yes.
I think, and I reading it and getting into it, I thought, oh, this is awesome. Like I've nailed everything, and pretty much I'm not actively seeking, but just kind of dabbling in applying for jobs. And I've only got one hit back after, I don't know, maybe 12 applications in the last 12 months, just here and there, things that pop up. And so I'm just kind of thinking, all right, well, what is it that I'm missing? And I think I just took some notes earlier of kind of refining it and really narrowing in. I think with my writing style, I tend to waffle on. And I found, writing essays during the study period was quite easy. It was actually refining it down to the word count. So I'm just wondering if that may be kind of hindering.
Great feedback.
Anyway, that's me.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because it is a fine art. Again, in another context, I had a group of students, an amazing student, and he just had too many words on the page. And then there's the other extreme where there's just not enough words at all. So, but as Alison, she just shared before, it might have been before you, he just has recently been through a process with it, and she said she got multiple edits. So that is really important, as many sets of eyes. So editing, culling out any of those extra words. And the other thing is automatic tracking systems. So I'm going to talk about the automatic tracking systems for the cover letter and resume. So, you know, you said that you've had a few hits, but not many. So that's about the key words. So I'm going to talk about that as well. So that could also be quite a dominant factor into it as well. So that's a really big part of both the cover letter and resume process. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you, Lois. So don't chuck your belly out with the bathwater. Awesome. Anybody, Diane? Oh yeah, John, please share. Yes.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I guess part of the issue is that I've had a very long career and ended up as a managing director of a major multinational internationally, and also on various Australian standards, including the first SARS-1 outbreak, where I was a technical expert for the government. The challenge with all of that is that's not where I am, and I kind of fell into my career after my father developed multiple sclerosis, and then had a pretty ugly family breakup about 5 years ago, and have my daughter mental health issues, no psychologists around. So I did a degree in psychology. What else do you do? And then 3/4 of the way through masters at SCU at the same time, and a degree out of Deakin at the same time. So actually at one stage I was doing 3 postgrad degrees. So it's kind of, how do you narrow that down and get rid of all the kerfuffle, because it's not like there's been multiple jobs and multiple things, there's been a lot of how do you get that into something that makes sense, particularly when you're dealing with in the area of work that I would be likely to work in is more in that partial area. It tends to be a lot of government domination.
Yep.
Very automated systems, very, tick this box. What career title did you have? I sat on the other side of the equation. I know how it works.
Yeah.
That's my challenge.
Yeah, I can understand that. And I heard something recently that might be helpful for you. That one phrase that just popped into my head. It wasn't what I was going, that they say, make your mess your success. Meaning, those things that have happened in your life. But the reason I was going there is that the first thing that I remembered that I heard recently was that those things that you have had the most experience with in your that be your story about how you're helpful to others, because what you've just described to me is how you've navigated through your own circumstances, and managed, and that's actually feeding into your career. So that's actually part of who you're going to be. You're not there yet because you're in that transition. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's actually, again, your power. That's where power is probably not the right word, but that's your point of differentiation. And in your case, and it's just some reframing for you, which might, you may get with some coaching, is that is just flipping the story in your mind about. So one of the things I heard you say in the beginning was something that it was. I can't remember what the word was, but you implied that it was, which of course not negating that it was difficult, but in fact, that's your strength. So it's actually completely flipping the fact that you have been you've had that powerhouse career, so to speak, and then you've also had these personal circumstances, right? So you put those two together. And what that may mean is that you transition just a little, you transition at this level, but it means you'll then take off because of that background. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's a couple of, I guess, ironies for me in that I have local community health having me coach their kids on how to survive anorexia and self-harm.
Yeah.
And written a paper with the Centre of Excellence on anorexia, but can't seem to find that. A way to get that down as being significant when there's not that career title. So I guess that's where the challenge becomes.
Yeah, and these things, because I noticed that I think it was Nicole had a similar experience, and that can be both a challenge, but also a great strength, because you've got so much to offer. So I'll show you it'll make more sense when we get to the resumes.
Yep.
Because then you can actually, and also in your resume, this will apply to everybody here. In your resume, you're going to have a career summary at the beginning. So that's where you get to tell your story about, not only have you got the lived experience, not only do you have a multitude of qualifications, but you've been, the top of your field. So that's where you get to tell that bigger story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So
so you don't get to lose that. Yeah, you don't have to. And I think what we think often is that we have to be one or the other, or that these things don't matter, and they matter enormously.
Yeah, the general advice that I've received so far in talking to coaches has been drop anything that's older than 5 years. We don't want to know about it.
Yeah, but yes, I agree. Yeah. And I wouldn't say 5, I say 10, but also you keep the bones of that. Yeah. You don't go giving away that huge career you've had. That's who you are. Anyway, we'll get into, So I think what happens, I see it all the time, and is that we can forget what we've already, and not look at how we can bring that story in for it to make a point of difference, rather than it be it's actually so it's just actually flipping it both in the written form, but actually flipping it in your mind as well, so that you flip the language for yourself around it, even how and that can be, it's easier said than done, trust me, but you're here, And it sounds like you've overcome an enormous amount to get here. So again, that is what will be most helpful in your field because you're doing it. Yeah. So that's what I was saying about the mess and success, not saying anything to do with commenting on your personal.
Yeah, no, sure.
But that's where just the reality of life then becomes something successful for you, if that makes sense. So we can work through that. All right.
Thanks for that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
My pleasure. All right. So, and many of the things that we've just talked about for John there will apply for the majority of you guys if you not immediately out of school. So we're going to cover as much of that as we can. I'm just going to pause for a sec because it won't let me minimize. And this is where some of this stuff, John, and for Nicole, actually for the majority of you guys, from what I can observe in here, where we're going to talk about things that stand out. Now, and I'll shoot to this one. I'll jump here. All right. So this is what your cover letter is going to look like. So back to Lewis's point about how many words, I tend to go for the suggestion, most of the time, 90% of the time, maybe different, maybe for a couple of you in health, government, that it's generally speaking a one-page cover letter. Just a tiny bit about formatting. Have wide margins. So when the margins are narrow and there's not a lot of words in the paragraph, there's too much white space. So that's just a bit about the formatting. So wider margins. And for, just in the instance that, if we would talk about if you don't mind me sharing, using yours as an example, John, with your sort of powerhouse statement, so to speak, the first paragraph is where I like to always say you want to add a hook, right? So I'll come back to I'm applying for the position of da-da-da. Then you're going to add a couple of sentences. So if we use John's case, it would be, that you've those X number of qualifications related to the field of work. And whatever, what was your title, John? Was it your most senior position?
Executive General Manager, Asia Pacific.
There we go. So you could put, you may or may not need, so that, and depend, the role will be in social work, something in that arena, but it would say, apply for having had or held the position of blah, 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 alongside XYZ. All right. So then you're immediately positioning and utilizing and capitalizing on that story and you can play around with whether you use 5 years, 10 years, 20. I've even looked at, say for example, people in my profession, and I look at whether they put 20 years on there and whether that makes them look older. In my observation, I haven't seen, but sometimes it can. So playing around with what you feel comfortable with in terms of what you're highlighting, but you're using it to couple, so that previous experience, you're using that to couple the new story. So it's like this amazing add-on, and it's something different because nobody in that, most people in that first paragraph, they don't say a lot. So if your story is around, like first class honours and, amazing research papers, then that's what you're going to put there. If it's around, I think it was Lewis that's got, I think it's about the MBA, but, X number of years in hospitality, retail, delivering. So if you think about what's required in, an MBA essentially is to run business better. And at the end, and underneath the business is a customer. So whether you're in a university, So that's where you can utilize hospitality, retail in that top story. And I'm sort of just making it up as I go, but just so that you can get that idea of how to really capture their attention. I talked about keywords. You could drop a keyword or two in there, and we'll talk about what that looks like in a minute. But it's just a couple of, so you'll put just some basic formatting stuff. You'll put your name details on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, all of their details. People ask me all the time, how do I get the contact details? Just ring them up or look on LinkedIn or send them an email. People often avoid doing it. It usually takes 10 minutes. So, and the theory is that if you write, "Dear Mr. Boydell," rather than, to the household, if it were junk mail, you're much more likely to read it. Bearing in mind that, again, back to Lewis's point about keywords, what's going to happen now, and again, I could probably talk for half an hour, so if I'm going as fast as I can, but in recent years, so Seek, Jora, Career One, all of those platforms now use automatic tracking systems, and they're used, and so when you get rejected, and I put that in inverted commas, it's actually a computer that's rejecting you, and the computer is rejecting you based on the criteria that the employer puts in. So all it's looking for is things that are reflected in their, and next week I'll talk about setting up your Seek profile, because your Seek profile is where you're going to find out more about what it is the employers are putting into those machines. So lots and lots to talk about. So what people often don't realize is that, probably I'd say, I'm taking a guess, but 85% is a machine that's going to read it. But then when you get down to in front of the peeps, that's when these standout paragraphs, in terms of, those really interesting stories. People love stories. They want to know if you've lived or worked overseas. They love grades. They love TAFE. They love lots of practical experience. They love micro learning. I'll talk more about all of that sort of stuff. So they're just points of difference. So that's your first paragraph. Then you're going to have a couple of paragraphs on the very specific, again, back to Lewis's point, specific, refined, and competency statements related specifically, as it says here, to the job advertisement and the job criteria. It's the selection criteria. So you must, one of my top tips here is you must be micro-analyzing that job, and it might take you some time to apply for a few different jobs, and then you get feedback. If it's predominantly through Seek, you'll get feedback from Seek, and it'll actually tell you the skills that you don't have. So it can be a bit of time figuring out how to put those industry specific and job specific. So there'll be specific ones more broadly. If we use social work as an example, whatever's current in social work at the moment, things change. So it might be, person-centered, focus, solution orientated, or solution focus. So you're putting those words in, and I'll talk more, show what that looks like in the resume, but you're putting those words into your cover letter and all through your resume, of course. Then towards the end, and I'm going to give you a few variables, a few caveats, or not caveats, but just slightly alternative ways that you can do this. But it's much the same. If you look up how to write a good cover letter, it's much of a muchness across. So, but before I step back there, they want to see so here's a take home. So if you were to leave this workshop now, they want results, they want achievements, they want the results of your work, the evidence, they want metrics. So if I always do this, if for some reason you don't come back next week and you never get around to listening to the recording, resume worded is pop your current resume through there. Make sure you have a healthy self-esteem before you do pop it in there. I had a colleague in a different capacity, and she didn't know about it, and she popped it in there. She's been a trainer for, I don't know, 10 years, and she said she got 26%. But it's because a computer's reading it, and so it will horrify you or delight you. Hopefully it delights you. So you want to work towards what that machine is telling you. You can put your LinkedIn through there. I don't think at this stage you can put your cover letter through there. Resume worded, it's free. You can put it through multiple times before you can put it through, I think 12 or 13 times before you have to pay any money. It is amazing. It's the best. There's lots of these machines out there. Career One also, if you happen to chip off into the ether, Career One offers a free service. I think they do cover letters, I'm not sure, but they definitely do resumes. And they do it, they have a person look at it for free and a computer. So that's really helpful. Be prepared, it's brutal. So there's just a couple of tools in case you get busy or whatever. All right, so this final paragraph or towards before you close the letter is that you're going to, and this is really, really important, have a look at last week's slides because it was sort of the recording actually from last week. We've got a recording on YouTube that Alison sends you out. We talked a lot, and this might be a helpful one for all of you guys, particularly when you're transitioning into new, like rebuilding, transitioning your work experience, is knowing about what the employers, so before you write that cover letter, is spending time to work out what your top strengths are, what your values are, what is most important to you now as you go back into the world of work, and then communicating that to the employer. So, and that's where is talking from a place of, so when you make this next decision about where you're going to start looking for work, slow it down a little bit and think about, not that you desperately, although these are desperate times in some instances, but for longevity and for well-being and for well-being at work, slow it down a little, unpack it, get some help from the team, get clarity, then target your actions for your cover letters, your resumes. Then you will much more likely, it sounds a little bit like the law of attraction, but there is more research. There's an interesting study that's come out of somewhere in the US, and it's called, they talk about your beats, your beliefs, emotions, attitudes, thoughts, and I can't remember what the S is, but that essentially that there's science now about how we think and then the actions that we take, how that then looks into our future. So I strongly encourage you to look at who you want to work for. When you read, you may not always get it right, but look at the job advertisement and think, if it's a huge job advertisement and you feel exhausted by the time you get to the end of it, that's a pretty big red flag, because if the job advertisement is enormous, that's what you're going to be required to do in the job. On the other hand, if it's really brief and there's no branding on there, there's no salary on there, there's, just because there's no salary, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad company to work for. But if there's no branding, they're not talking about who they are, what they stand for, steer clear, because you want to work for who you're going to be a good fit with. So if they know who they are, you know who you are, and there's that fit, you're going to have a good time. So that's really, really important. And that's where you're going to communicate that in your final or one of your final paragraphs there. And you can do that with really genuine, I've seen people do it beautifully. So look at what really strikes you about the social enterprise that it is, or the IT business. Maybe it's it's been operating since 1999, family owned, and their values are aligned with XYZ. So think about what you genuinely like. I saw someone recently, which was really cool, is that they put their values actually in the first paragraph, and it was actually really rather effective. And so they immediately said, you said that you want this kind of person, and they really clearly and distinctly said, this is who I am. And it was great. It worked really well. Generally, I'd say down towards the end. All that really matters is that when you get into the top of the pile, is that you've got something that's really interesting. And everybody has every single person that I have come across has a story of some sort to share, and that's the key. So that's the fourth paragraph, and then just close the paragraph. One of the most important things with closing the letter is, of course, that it's positive tone. I'm always a bit dubious about, calling them in for an interview. What I can say is that you frame it around looking forward to meeting them rather than hearing from them, that you frame it from the presumption that you will meet with them, and I'm looking forward to that time, rather than I hope to hear from you, in that that it's that happy place of I've got something to offer you, and I look forward to when we can have one of my colleagues, a great, in fact, her name's Mandy Kai. You might want to look at her. She's just, I want to listen to it. She's just on Spotify. She's just started. She's great at what she does. She's just done a career calling. Oh, sure, no worries. No problem. She's just done a career, doing some stuff on Spotify for career calling. So another free resource for you. So close the letter, make sure that the tone and sign it. The tone is positive. I wouldn't go on and on and on. I see people write a really long paragraph at the end. Back to Alison's point about the specific criteria. So in a job advertisement, they'll have a good job advertisement. They'll have, essential criteria. I'm not saying it's bad if it doesn't have essential and optional. But if they have optional, I would still, towards the end of the letter. So the optional might be might be, so for example, some government jobs, no, it wouldn't be optional, but it will be, something like a police clearance. Now, the funny thing is with a police clearance, so if you want to work in, say, federal government, defence, some of those lines of work, interesting work. But the thing about a police clearance is that you can't get a police clearance until you get a job. And it's like this kind of really interesting loophole. So towards the end, you'll address those other things, so say you haven't yet got your working with children's check, you say willing, in any kind of social work, or you'll need that, but you just say, I've got it, waiting for the paperwork to arrive. So addressing some of that other criteria towards the end of the cover letter. So here's the most important things for you to know. So in last week's workshop, which I encourage you, just when you have 10 minutes, just scoot through it. When I send them out at the end, is that one of the first slides in there is a graduate student, and I think he applied for, I can't remember whether it was 1,000 or 100. Anyway, either way, it's a heck of a lot of jobs. And when he really tailored his, wasn't one of my students, but it was one of my colleagues' students. When he tailored he got no hits. So when he tailored his application, and tailored it for every role. And that can be just like, oh my God, so exhausting. But just remember what I said. So you get a really good foundation, and then edit it. And then once you get a job, keep that version and then just start tweaking it from there. But you must, and I always suggest that you work on order of how much you want it. So if you really, really want that job, then spend, the maximum amount of time. So you manage your energy around it, because it can be it can be tiring to, we've probably all applied for jobs. And then also what I've observed is I've got a colleague at the moment, keeps getting like really close to getting these jobs, keeps getting interviews. And there's almost this kind of, again, I'm probably sounding a bit like a hippie, but is that when you're hot, you're hot. You're not. That's the first thing. But also when you sort of, there's a interesting process of just putting in the action and then actually just letting go of how it's going. Because if you keep putting in the action, taking in and this can be applied to any areas of your life, you then put it down and then carry on with something else. So you find you're getting exhausted, you put it down and then go and go and do something else. Also, to really, is to write as much from this, again, right from, I've heard friends, I don't know about students per se, but certainly people in the business, friends that have applied for jobs, and certainly has been my experience as well, where you write from, and that's where if you really want the job, it will flow a lot more easily when you're writing that cover letter. So that you can actually really communicate, they can feel that, because it's not just blah, blah, blah. So that's why I really, really encourage you that if you see amazing, we all know, well, most of you, and you will if you later on as you get a little bit further down the track, you'll start to know the types of employers or the types of social enterprises, or whether it's not-for-profit organisations that you think are really genuinely doing great work, that they keep popping up, or you notice that you keep noticing them, then they're the ones you want to aim your energies towards. So don't put to the hiring manager, keep keywords. Those keywords are going to come from the job advertisement. Relevant skills, experience, relevant to the job. So back to the case of, I think it was, the other lady that was here, is the, you get to tell you, so if we use, again, if you don't mind, John, I'll use your example, that, and probably the same for Lewis and the other lady that was here before, is that you use, like, you can still tell that story of your fabulousness, yeah, of all that amazing, all that other life story, whether it was time in, Singapore managing big clients, whatever, or it was other study. Tell that story, because it's part of who you are, and it's interesting, and it's different, and there's so huge amount of experience that comes from that. But then go back to also really drilling down into, now that you've retrained, I not only have all these employability skills around, how to work successfully in teams, because I've done it for 20 or 30 years, whatever it is, but I also have, these are the technical skills required, whether it's conducting assessments, or whether it's, doing a BAS, helping people with BAS statements, whatever it is that's specifically related to that job. And that's where you're going to find that information in the job advertisement. Again, focusing on evidence, and this is the actual key. So what often happens, probably, I don't know, every day, millions of times a day, people write cover letters and then they say, oh, I've got communication experience, I've got management experience, or I've got IT experience. And they might mention the technical skills. So it might be, software design, whatever, data analysis, blah, blah, blah. But they won't actually, so it's one thing to have a skill, but they won't say what level that skill is at, and also how they've used that skill to benefit the team? Like, so if it's project management skill, how did you use that project management skill? What was the result of using that skill? So what people do when they put their cover letters together is they just put these skills in isolation, or skills predominantly, and experience in isolation, but they don't talk about how it actually is going to be useful to the company they're going into. Concise paragraphs. I would suggest for, I'm not sure of everybody's circumstances here, but I'd certainly say for the majority of you, is that you're aiming for 4 to 6 sentences. That would be my strongest suggestion. 4 to 6 sentences per paragraph. If that feels too much for you, go for 4, but don't have 2 or 3. And that actually, it really applies to even your academic writing. Selection criteria, probably the most unexciting component of all. But even if you're thinking about scooting on out of the room, selection criteria goes into the cover letter. So I'm going to talk about that for the final hour, and then we'll have heaps of, probably half an hour, and then we've got time to then talk about any specific, even just do a little bit of writing, in fact, to start unpacking some of this stuff for your cover letter and selection criteria, because selection criteria actually is in the job advertisement. But I'm just going to talk about what's addressing selection criteria looks like, as opposed when you address it separately, as opposed to when you put it in a cover letter. So stick around if you can. If not, you get the recording. We're just going to take a 10-minute break. I don't want to exhaust you, but I don't want to lose you as well. So if you can hang around for yourself. If you have to go, that's totally fine too. The recording will be there. So we'll make sure we've got time to just unpack these things also. So then when you are ready, you've started this process, this kind of theory to practice in terms of how to extrapolate that experience that you've had and communicate that, because this is a process. So you're going to communicate it into the cover letter, communicate it into the resume, and then communicate it into the into your interview. Hello, Charity. Welcome. We're just about, you might be on Queensland time. We're just going to take a break. We're just going to start talking here in good timing. You can listen to the recording for the other. I'm so glad that you're here and that you've made this time for yourself live. We're going to talk about selection criteria, how it fits in the cover letter, really, really important stuff. And then also selection criteria, how it exists if you're applying for any government job. There's a really specific approach, and that is for transparency. If anybody knows about the John Barilaro case, you will know that transparency, well, he did get caught out. So it's to actually make sure that nepotism and those sorts of bad behaviour doesn't happen when people are applying for jobs, but we all know it happens. But that's what the purpose of selection criteria is. So it's really important stuff. So I'm going to pause the recording. So I'll see you guys in 10 minutes. All right, and we'll have plenty of time. We're just going to scribble some notes as we work through a bit, and then have some time just to have a chat, see where those still things that I can help you with, those questions that are still niggling for you at the end. So I'll see you soon. So welcome back, everybody. We're going to start. I'm going to do a little activity. So if you're listening from home, please grab a piece of paper. What you'll find, or if you listen to the workshops come on board, is that I'm happy to say that I do most of the things that I will share with you in my own process, because I've found them helpful, and I'll try to share, as much as I've observed what's worked for other people, but also tools and things that I've used myself in my own process. So one of the things I like to do this one on you can do it on a piece of paper. You can also do it on a big cardboard, like on a big piece of cardboard. Because what you'll find is, and depending on where you're up to, is that some of this stuff from the past isn't going to change. So you're going to be adding things to the story. So when you are looking for that next job, then you're going to add things that will, and you keep training, keep studying, keep doing more placements. You're going to add to that story. But some of the your best wins, your best memories, and often your friends, your partners, your grandparents, your kids, they remember things that we often forget. They'll say, oh, hey, what about when you did that? And you're like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. So, and you'll be surprised. I find that like these kind of visioning activities, again, there's more science in this arena. And I think there will continue to be around, and I'm a big fan of kind of evidence-based tools and things. And so there is more science in it. So for example, you can do a vision. For one of my studies at University of Queensland, we did a vision board as one of our assignments, which I freaking loved, have used it ever since, really powerful. But this particular tool I find really helpful because you get it down on paper and again, then you can build on it. So what I'd like you to do is just quickly to write down, you can play around with it later on. This is just to give you ideas. So perhaps you haven't traveled or you're not involved in social clubs or communities, kind of not where your focus is at the moment, or, that's not, however, this is just to give you an idea. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to jot down. So, and you could, even if you wanted to, people got such varied backgrounds here, you could break it down into, particular, maybe there was a period where you're in hospitality, maybe you're in, legal aid. So you could even then just break it down from there. But what are the things that you're most proud of? Because this is what's going to go into your cover letter. It's going to go into your resume. It's going to go onto your LinkedIn. And it's going to go into the interview. It's going to get you the job. Employers love travel, and they love any kind of, most people love travel. So, maybe you did some independent travel. Maybe I think we've got an international student here, studied abroad, and that may not seem so exciting and exotic, here in, for you right now where you're at, but you go back to, your country of origin, and that time, that all those hard yards that you put here in Australia, will be so interesting. And it's the only thing often when you do return from work overseas that people want to talk about because it's something different. And so, or maybe there's particular, hobby that might be interesting that you can weave into the relevance of the work. Things you've done with your kids, if you've got children, maybe there's things you've done if you're younger, and things that you've done in the community through sport isn't actually on here. Sport's a great one. Employers love it. So let's give you a couple more minutes. Uni. So it might be that you don't have, like, I've had students that they didn't have a GPA of 6.5 out of 7, but they had fantastic employability skills, easy to get along with. They worked really well in teams. They you know, they were optimistic, they're enthusiastic, they were, employers love extroversion, but doesn't mean just because you're not an extrovert, you won't get the job. And they've done really, really well. So, you know, if the academia is not, you know, where you're getting the results, hopefully, has everybody got something down on there? Next one might help you a little bit more. I'd like you to, now, so for anybody who is currently, can you just type the time frame in there when you're finishing up, when you're due to finish? So any kind of experience that you can now get, even you know, you're doing your MBA, any experience that you can get, you got your placement with social work. Luckily, employers are desperate for employees. Any experience you can get now and to when you graduate, even if it's, you know, volunteering at the Cooley Rocks on, it will look great. Just going to give you a couple of minutes now just to work through some of the questions on here. So this question here, for example, what were the most valuable things that you learned? It may be that you haven't done placement, but perhaps you learned what leadership, you know, maybe you had an amazing leader and that's relevant to the position. So for example, I recently had this experience in another capacity where I observed the probably not the biggest boss in a fairly large organization, but one of the senior managers. I observed her make it wasn't necessarily an error. It was just a misjudgment of, you know, of what her employees needed. And what she did was she owned it and she brought the team together and she took feedback and she didn't pretend to know everything. And so that's a, you know, a really valuable learning, you know, that I, you know, observed and experienced of what that, you know, what management, well, actually it's leadership. You know, the two are different, although leaders still need to manage. It's great leadership. So it doesn't have to be, as long as you can link it back to the role about what you've learned. So it could be something that you saw, how you saw a customer or how you observed, you know, a colleague or somebody treat a customer in a particular situation. Because these are stories and people love stories. Also, I saw a really interesting thing about contribution, and this might be helpful for when you're going to an interview. It was about public speaking, and it was about, you know, the terror of public speaking, and which is common to, you know, half the population, half the planet, actually, probably more. And the way to overcome that, which might be helpful for the interview, my friend likes to talk about when you're in the interview as it being a conversation. And when you're having a conversation, you want to be able to contribute to that conversation. So the same thing about the profession and the field of work that you're going into. How can I contribute to this business now with my MBA, or you know, with your other postgrad qualifications, whatever they may be? How can I contribute? What can I now bring? So if we think about, it's a really beautiful study, which I think a few of you guys will enjoy doing. Again, it's evidence-based, and this might be helpful for finding out what your strengths are. It's a study done by a group of scientists. Character strengths. It's really, I love it. And I've noticed that they're using it in all sorts of platforms. So it's a helpful tool there. Welcome. Hi, Han. We're just talking about, really what we're going to put into the cover letter and the selection criteria, what we're going to communicate in our resume. And so you can't really do that effectively without spending some time to unpack. So what I'd suggest, I'm just going to go back a bit, just take a screenshot of this. And when you get ready for your next job, hun, and you're most welcome to type in the chat box, anything, you can flick your mic on, happy for you to sit however you feel most comfortable to be here. Take a screenshot of that so you've got it for later, and then just listen to the rest of the, if you've got some time before you start applying for a job, for the rest of this. It's on YouTube, the Postgraduate Association's YouTube. It'll be there next week. So we're just working through some of these questions because this is what you're going to communicate. These are specific things about you, whether you study social work, social science, law, PhD, that you're going to, so there we go. So something you learned from your supervisor, other staff. What would an employer state are your key strengths as an employee? Welcome. No, I love it that you've made the effort to come here. So that's awesome. All right. So not only are you looking at answering these questions, but also this comes back to actually everywhere in your cover letter, your resume, and your interview. I like to sort of, I won't, spend half an hour now talking about the interview, but I do like to bring them all together so you can see how they all feed and fit within one another. The employer is going to give you a job advertisement. You're going to apply for that job based on the job advertisements after you've done a bit of unpacking about both yourself and the organisation. Then you're going to communicate to them by addressing both the selection criteria and or writing a cover letter, and I'll contextualize that in a minute. And you're going to talk about, as I mentioned earlier, not just about how you've got IT skills. You're going to talk about the results of doing your IT. What happens when they're specific skills, or they might be your employability skills, and you're able to help a team, you effectively, or, something to do with leadership or management. How did you, grow that business by X, Y, Z? How did you improve efficiencies? Or maybe you're not in management or have managing experience. Sporting achievements. Those that are, able to achieve sports, even in individual sport, it still needs, you still need to be working towards a goal, which all organisations, or effective ones, are doing, working towards an organisational goal. Hopefully they have a clear vision and a mission for what it is that they're doing. Not to say that visions and missions can't change. And organisational objectives. And then what do you do outside of your work? And maybe you're not doing anything at the moment, and that is okay, because sometimes, like the crazy world that we're in at the moment, sometimes just studying and caring for family and whatever else it is that you're doing is not, raising money for charity, and that's okay too. So just looking at what you do have, but also in this process, you can reflect now on what those perhaps skills and experience and qualifications that you might need as you move forward. So working as part of a team. So, if you're younger and you haven't had lots and lots of work experience, but you will have worked as part of a team somewhere, and you even at school, university assignments, your part-time job, you're all gaining some sort of qualifications. So even if you haven't got a great GPA, perhaps there's relevant assignment that you did where you got that you had to, you know, solve a problem or something like that. So there's multitude of different ways that you can do that. Just jumped back a little bit. So, selection criteria. So just so it's really, really clear, selection criteria is probably the least sexiest of all the topics. So what you need to know about selection criteria is that they're either going to tell you what the selection criteria is in the job advertisement, or they're going to ask you to, there'll be, depending on how big some government jobs, you know, the paperwork is 5 pages and you have to take you 5 times as long to find out what it is that you're required to do. But essentially, it is written within the advertisement somewhere about the requirements for the role. So what are selection criteria? They're actually a list of qualifications. Oops. So you guys are all working on your qualifications at the moment. Your personal qualities. So these are the things like your personality. So it could be that you're conscientious, you're easygoing. So there's a model called the top 5 factor model. Employers want people with extroversion. And again, don't panic if you're not an extrovert. They want people that are easy to get along with others. And they want people that are conscientious. You can actually take a test online to see whether you're. So there's some of your personal qualities, and then your skills and abilities. So these will be your employability skills. So skills you've gained from living and studying abroad, being in a sporting team, managing teams, caring for, you know, in the case of one of the students, caring for family members when it's, you know, whether it's a caring capacity, mental health, physical well-being in any of the social services. So those experiences and skills, lived experience, knowledge and skills. So we have, you know, if you're going into any of the, maybe you've had an accident, an injury, and you're going to go into work in rehab or whatever it is. So that are relevant for the job advertisement. They are a person, what a person needs to perform the role effectively. So they're often addressed in writing, but you're also going to talk about them, as it says here, you're going to talk about them in the interview. And those that address the selection criteria the best, either in the cover letter or separately, depending on what the employer asks, that's how you'll get shortlisted. So if it says, please address in any government position, so academia, any of the government or most of the government jobs, they will give you very specific criteria. You have to, there'll be something like a competencies framework, and some of them can be quite overwhelming and complicated. But the good thing is you can Google just about anything these days. So to find out, you know, applying for New South Wales Government Capabilities Framework, there'll be heaps and heaps of stuff online. There'll be tutorials, there'll be lots and lots of. So if you're going for a job in Queensland Health, or so there's government jobs, there will always be selection criteria, and they do it, as I said, for transparency. They form the basis of the interview, and it's to make sure that the process is fair. And as I just referred to the John Barilaro case, if you don't know about it, the only thing to know is that this is so that the process is fair and transparent. So what happened is they called it a plum job overseas, and the criteria, he was not necessarily, I don't know what's happened in the end with that. I don't know if he was not the, they didn't follow protocol. So that means correct behaviour in terms of the requirements for that role. So that's essentially why it's there. So here's the trick to answering selection criteria. Now you can use this STAR model in your interview, in your cover letter, and not in your resume. So, but certainly in the interview, because in the interview, particularly for a government role, you're going to give a selection criteria response. You're probably going to expand on that or something similar, or another example. But you're going to, so please come along to the interviews, or make sure interview workshop, because we'll be focusing on the STAR. It sounds more complicated than what it is. It's really just, so give us a situation. So when I worked at Bunnings, you don't even have to say whether that was in 2010 or 2001. When I worked at Bunnings in the role of customer service, and then what were you required to do? The task was, I was required to manage the paint section, all right? And so actually I'll go back to the situation. So when I worked at Bunnings, whilst working in the paint section, I had a difficult customer who was upset because we didn't have a particular paint. So that's a situation. Your task was that you worked in the paint section, and your role was to ensure that people got the right paints. So what was the detailed action that you took? So and I'm just making this up as I go. So the customer was unhappy that we didn't have a particular paint. So what I did was I got onto our global system, or whatever, our national system. I quickly located the paint in our Coffs Harbour store, and I organised for that paint to arrive within 48 hours to our Tweed Heads place. I was able to do that because the customer couldn't locate that for themselves, and without being able to find that internally. What was the result? The customer was overjoyed because it was a particularly difficult paint to get, and they were really happy because they were able to paint their back deck. All right, so it's an example of. So the other alternative, which has happened, we've probably all been into a shoe shop where we want a particular size of shoe, for example, and they can probably go onto their system and look all over Timbuktu, but they pretend they can't, just as an example. So that's the difference. And so, or you have to ask them, and then they won't, oh no, we can't ship it. And and this, of course, you're confined by policies. So you're going to be giving these examples of, so that's the difference between the results of your work and your actions, as opposed to just saying, I work well in a team. How do you work in a team, and what happens? What's your role in a team? So when you're in a team, everybody's got a different role. Some people like to take notes, help prepare all of the foundation. So I gather up everybody's emails so that everybody communicates effectively. I set up a WhatsApp site, and then I make sure that everybody, has their WhatsApp organised, etc., etc. Or you might be the one that likes to present the presentation. So you practice with one other person presenting the teamwork. So when you go for a job, you're going to be assessed on your ability, and this is really important, to demonstrate. And you must, if you don't demonstrate that you're able to follow, particularly for these government jobs, the capabilities. So what are you capable of doing? Knowledge, what do you know how to do, and what sort of experience do you have for that role? Then they can, because it has to all be transparent for the government positions, is that they cannot give you that job. You're always welcome to, if you believe that you have applied for a position and you have been discriminated against on any circumstances, particularly for a government position, they do need to be able to demonstrate how you have or how you haven't met the criteria. So here's a really, really common one that'll be in just about every job. And I actually I was laughing with a friend, because it's like, probably for many of you guys, once you get to a certain point in your career, you need to be able to communicate relatively effectively. So it's like, how many times do I have to tell you? But it shows you how important it is for whether you're working for Commonwealth Bank at home or in a hybrid role as an IT support professional. You are still going to need to be able to talk to that team, both a written and electronic. You're still going to need to turn up to those boring old Zoom meetings. You're still going to need to be able to fill in, write emails to let people know, etc., etc. So teamwork will come up everywhere. But again, you need to talk about communication. You need to be able to talk about how you effectively communicate. So you adjust your communication style according to X, Y, Z. You check for clarity, etc., etc. So how do you use that? So here we go. So just as an example, these are ways that you can talk about. And so you might like to take a screenshot or just, so when this will come up, every job, working as a waiter, working for Home Affairs, working at Bunnings, you will need your communication skills. It ain't likely to go out of fashion anytime soon. Just the way that we communicate is different. One thing that I can say that I have observed, and this may be probably not so relevant for you guys that are older, because you've probably come from more of a generation of old school, but because there are so many, not saying you're older, but you're older than than like a new grad, that slightly different generation. This isn't a criticism, it's more just, so if we've got some younger people here, because we have so many different communication platforms now, people forget to be polite. So that's a really quick and easy way to stand out from the pack. So if somebody sends you something, you say, thank you so much, for sending that through to me. So just really common courtesy can actually set you apart enormously, because people forget to say please and thank you now. And again, it's not a criticism, it's just the way that it is. And so that's, if you're negotiating, a role or different working conditions, so that you're really polite. So that's just an example of communication. How to improve how to stand out from the pack is be polite and use spell check. So when you're writing these selection criteria, here's just a few do's and don'ts. Respond to all the criteria. So we were just having a conversation when Alison was here from the Postgraduate Association. There'll be what they call essential criteria in a really formal job advertisement, essential criteria and optional criteria. Sometimes it'll all be bundled together, and just assume if it's all bundled together, it's all important. But I would address all of it. So even if you don't have all the criteria, it's still, if you've got the majority of the criteria for the job, address all of that, and then talk about how you're going to go about getting the other qualifications. So perhaps it's, I don't know, some sort of you're in IT and you haven't got the software qualifications, some sort of new micro learning that you need. You just say, I'm willing to gain that qualification. So you just demonstrate that you're willing to do whatever if you haven't got those other ones. Use an active voice. So using strong sort of evidence-based words rather than things like, oh, I might, I could. So they would be passive, I think. And actually, in fact, Alison was talking about that when she got someone to edit her cover letter. They went through and made those expressions much more confident and strong, because they can also pick up on, when you're not so, we dob on ourselves too. So for example, if there's something we're worried about, whether it's some sort of disability or lack of experience or whatever it is, we'll say, oh, we haven't got that. So what you do is you focus on everything that you do have, and then wait for them to ask you about that thing that you're most concerned about, needing some sort of adjustments at work, because you don't want to be discriminated again based on, it should be always about your capacity to do that. your ability to do that job. So that's give examples. So that's where your stories come in. Be positive, be succinct, be honest. And that's a really important one because it'd be really tricky to expand on a selection criteria example in your interview if if it's not a true story. You're like, yeah, that didn't happen. And so what happens in both the cover letter and the resume component, so cover letter, resume, and interview process, from the recruiter's perspective, what they're looking for is errors and faults and reasons to get rid of you. So they're looking for red flags. So what happens is you become highly attuned to red flags. So if somebody hesitates, really micro, if it's on the phone, your breathing changes, all those, if it's over Zoom. So there's all here. There you go. There's an example when somebody's unsure about what they're going to say. There are always giveaways that they will get and be, really attuned for. So just make sure that you're practice, you're confident and you're honest. And what I suggest doing, and we'll talk about more over the next couple of weeks, is getting a few different, getting a few examples of your best wins, your best stories, and then being ready to talk about them from many different perspectives. So, for example, your strengths could be, you're an amazing salesperson, and you could actually weave that into a discussion about persuasion in terms of working with people with disabilities because they're the same skills. But I'll make all that clear a bit later on, so that then when you go into an interview, you've got a few great stories, great examples that because you don't know what the interview questions are going to be, and you've written them out in your cover letter, your resume, or you've alluded to them, given an example, and you're going to expand on them. Then you're ready for however when they ask you a curly question, you've got some, and that's where your big piece of paper, your white paper, can really help you. Demonstrate effective communication. So there's just an example. So here I have 3 years experience. So it's very specific in this star, communicating, talking about the types of people he or she communicated with, and then also something else. And so here's the star, an example where, so this actually, yeah, sorry, my apologies. So she's just opening up, but it's also framing the discussion. So the sort of like the circumstances then in that particular star story. Example where I was able to demonstrate excellent communication. So here's the example specifically at the base hospital. So we know that she's working with different people as a nurse and elderly patient. So this is the situation. A patient came in. This is what happened. I won't go into all of it, but what she was able to do was to contribute effectively by commenting, written documentation, X, Y, Z. So in that situation, what did she do? And then the results of her work were she contributed timely, positive outcome. The doctor commented, so it might be. And you may not be a nurse or whatever, but when you're at Bunnings, that that person wrote, put a lovely feedback thing on the website, or they sent something to, sent something to your supervisor, and then it was critical to a result. And also they have there's an R in there, but there can also be, so there's 2 stars or an L for learning. So learning or reflection. What did you learn from that process? So it was critical to maintaining effective, respectful and clear communication, especially when working as part of a team. So I've included some full examples in there. Here is just an example taken from a job advertisement. So they're saying to you, you will be assessed on the following. So you must, what I always suggest doing is copy and paste it, stick it into a Word doc, and then actually physically answer each one of these with a star, depending on how long they say So they may say, for example, they want a 1-page cover letter with you addressing all the selection criteria. Wow, that's going to be hard. But often they'll say for this many criteria, they'll say a 2-page. They may say a 2-page cover letter. They're saying that more commonly with this included, or they might ask for it to be included separately, which would be great, but very, very time consuming. So just included another example in there. Just conscious of time, want to make sure we've got some time to chat at the end. Excuse me, people at home, sorry. Just wanted to double check the time. Might just go for 5 more minutes and then answer any of your really specific questions, because I'm sure they will be relevant for everybody listening at home. So we won't do one. Oh, well, there we go. That's lucky. So, well, I won't do that. Still got the old date on there. So next week, pretty easy, same time, same place. We're doing LinkedIn. We're doing resumes and LinkedIn next week, but it's not in June. That was our last one. So thank you for staying. Is everybody happy for me to keep the recording on while you ask your questions or type things in? Or Diana, have I been able to help you with something specific that you've needed? Tommy, Charity, just type into the chat box. Do you feel more confused? Do you feel more confident? Oh, thanks, John. Okay, cool. Yeah, so do you want to jump in, or anybody like to jump in? Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for coming in. Don't forget to listen to the other hour. Yeah, cool. So, oh, good. Thanks, Diana. Is there anything that you sort of, oh, thanks, Tommy. Anything you still feel that you'd like to know more about? How about you, Lewis? Did that help you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I've been making notes all the way through. So I'll look to, just probably try and change what I've already got.
Yeah.
By incorporating some of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just, constant revision and see kind of what works, what doesn't. As I said, I'm fortunate that I'm not in a desperate need to go get a new job right now. Like, I'm comfortable in the role that I'm in, but it's just kind of thinking long term so I can keep pottering away at it. But look forward to
at the moment, Lewis. Other than caring for all of your babies, what's your job at the moment?
So I'm the director of golf at Bonville Golf Resort, just outside of Coffs Harbour.
Oh, amazing! Oh, fantastic!
Senior management position, kind of in charge of about 20 staff and the day-to-day runnings of a
great
organisation.
And so you're just was it you that's doing your MBA?
Yeah, so I just finished that a couple of months ago.
Yeah, amazing. So the really exciting thing for when you get to that point in your career is that now you can really just transfer. You can transfer across, the sporting arena across that way, or you've got a multitude of different directions you can go. Did you have an idea of where you wanting to go?
Yes and no. I mean, the idea of changing potentially to the government sector, either local council or state government roles, it is appealing.
Yeah.
Obviously, reduction of work hours and kind of a bit more consistency with a working schedule is appealing, but at the same time, I think the experience within the golf industry, you learn to meet the expectations of all sorts of people and all walks of life. So then transferring that to a different position or career path, I think will be easy. It's just communicating that in a cover letter of, okay, well, I've got all these skills and experiences and I've done this, done that, I've traveled, all that, but saying, okay, well, would you take a chance on allowing me to transfer those skills to a new role or organization?
And in fact, you've almost written your own punchline there, yeah? Because you can frame that in a, rather than would you, I think there's some great power and great confidence in that even that it's the benefits, the benefits of, so you sell the benefits of taking that chance of your transferable skills. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that can be a slightly done well, those sort of questions, as you know, as long as you back it up with of which you'll be able to do. Yeah, it's like, hey, because sometimes when you are transferring across to another industry, employers can get a little bit blindsided. Oh, well, it's manufacturing and he hasn't been a director in manufacturing. Yeah. So you almost need to catch them out, if that makes sense, and tell the story for them. Yeah. Because they can get quite, well, having said all of that, the times are changing. So the power is with the people. Woo-hoo! Yeah. So you have to, the need to do that less and less. But what they can do is get quite sort of like, you know, if somebody's worked in furniture and, you know, then they want to go into golf, they can get quite specific about, well, they haven't been in the furniture, yeah, or in retail, yeah. So you almost need to spell that out to them or catch that or dob them out for it in a really gentle way, if that makes sense. You can do it that way, or what you can do is sort of a little bit of, you know, you make your titles bigger and then make where, because when you get to that top of that pile, right, you've got all the words in there, then they're biases for whether, you know, you're in sport and you want to get into here, or, you know, then their biases can come into play. So you need to be ready for those biases. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think potentially that's what's
making the transitions.
Yeah, holding me back a little bit potentially. Is that, yeah, like if someone's reading, oh, he's director of golf, if they don't quite grasp like the detail that goes into my job, and like there's no 2 days are ever the same and it's 100 things going on at once, but trying to put that into words.
You've just put it into words, actually. So that's part you've actually just, so you need to do that spelling out for them, if that makes sense. So you need to frame the story for them so they understand, because what I see is they don't try to understand. They're in a hurry, right? And they're like, because they're looking for ways to eliminate rather than to cultivate, so to speak. Yeah. So you need to communicate that to them, and so that you're ready for any of those. And that's the case for anybody who's trying to it's not just you know, from sport to government. It's the same as from manufacturing to government or whatever it is. And that's just the challenge with making a transition or retraining, is that you have to do their thinking for them. And also in the interview, that's that same thing again. But you sound already alert to it, and also you've got some language around it, which is already all what you need to be able to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think I'll definitely be able to take away some key points, and look forward to kind of having a look at the other slides and videos of the other sessions. It's hard to taken today off, especially specifically
so last
for
week's
this.
one should be up there. Yeah, so we had we spent a lot of time at the beginning, and but a lot of time talking about strengths and values, and but I think that might be really helpful. Well, I think it's helpful for everybody, but is when you are making a transition, it's even if you're transitioning into a new field of work, that comfortability is even more poignant. And then those communicating those transferable skills, which is the case for many postgraduate students, because that's what they're doing often. Yeah. So, good, great.
Cool. Thank you.
My pleasure. John, and same for John, how did you go? Was that helpful for you?
Yeah, there were some things that certainly made sense. I guess, firstly, the whole concept of the workshop on who you are, looking at the community and whatever else. I guess I come from a really interesting background in terms of, I also come from a farming background, and my first degree is rural science.
Wow.
And actually went through the process of looking at being a farm gate counsellor with psychology, but it's funny, I had too much farming experience and not enough psychology. And then another friend of mine went to do the same thing. He had too much psychology and not enough farming. And you went, huh? But I mean, just who am I? You know, the whole, that was very important. The other thing that I've found is that because I've had a long, varied and successful, I guess, career and what else, changing that from a whole list of bullet points into something that actually makes sense, writing that story. I think that's a really important thing that I picked up out of it. Because you tend to think, it's almost like in the bad old days, you would basically put together your strengths and then you would go and talk to somebody, but you don't talk to anyone anymore. It goes through an automated system.
That's right.
Before you even get there.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that's a really important point, John. And also for those people that are listening at home, I am so conscious of this, that we probably have in Australia people with long-term disability now, because they actually don't know that it's, so after long-term employment now, people form, mental health issues, that becomes a disability for not knowing that they just get rejection after rejection after rejection. And it's merely that a computer is judging them. And for sensitive folks, they just lose hope. And perhaps folks that don't have, they're not resourced, so they don't have friends, family, education, what have you, or they have education, but they don't have people, able, or they're not reaching out for help. And so I'm so conscious of how important and how critical and how underknown, really, that it's actually a computer that is judging you, because it hurts, man.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny working in a human area where we're spending all of our time specifically, in my case, and yet we're actually eliminating the very people that we need because they're not used to being computers.
Yep. And that's the real, and in fact, it was a few years ago now, but there was some of the top graduate employers at this conference in I can't remember where it was, in Sydney, I think it was. And what they said was they realised, this is a slightly different scenario, but they realised the way that they were recruiting, they were actually missing the best graduates, because that their frame and their lens was too narrow. And so when these young people were coming into the roles, they had great GPA and they had X, Y, Z, but they lacked, some of those other things around creativity, critical thinking. They had critical thinking, but lacked the creativity in terms of the creativity attached to critical thought. And so so it is a slightly different example, but the same, to get through those graduate programs, it is a computer that, they have thousands of applicants, and those first 2 or 3 rounds, same with big government jobs, is it eliminates people because, of X, Y, Z, and then there's these wonderful pools of, there's a chance that things will change, but the situation is that it has been in the past, that the power's been with the employers, so they have massive numbers of people, so it makes sense that they just get rid of, people that, don't have the right qualification, so it's a culling process. But unfortunately, that if you don't know how to present yourself and trick the system in, even in that initial cull, you get culled when in fact you're perfectly capable, suitable, and could probably do the job with their eyes closed. So there's people, yeah. So I think it's brutal. But the very good thing for all of you guys is I'm very excited for you. Though wage growth is not expected to happen until 2024, and I'm not quite sure how all of that's going to go, but let's stick with 2022 while we're just here for a minute, is that it's rapidly becoming an employee's market. And never, I don't think, as long as I've been in this field of work, has it swung so quickly in a 2-3 year, so beginning of COVID, hundreds of thousands of people, we had the highest unemployment, and now we've got the highest, lowest unemployment. So it hasn't ever swung so dramatically between such a short period of time, and it looks set that the power will be with you guys. So the next couple of years, it's great timing for you guys in terms of being able to have more power and potentially more negotiating power in terms of probably perhaps not the growth, the salaries that we need, but certainly starting to, and I mentioned this to my father, and he's kind of the generation where the strikes then happen. So, but we haven't got the unions, in the way that we had. So it's going to be really interesting. But the positive in all the negative that's going on is that there's many, many, many more opportunities, that just before COVID, never, ever, ever did I see Twin Towns advertise. Ever. Not that Twin Towns is that exciting, but it's just an example. And never would they advertise for older people. And this entire advertisement, I was like, you little ripper. So that's the exciting thing. And yeah, exciting for you guys. So, and now when you find out what the system, so if you don't get to come next week, please, please, please listen to it for the help, for the suggestions around setting up your link, setting up both your LinkedIn, your automatic tracking systems for your resumes, and for your Seek profile. And I learned, I don't know when it was, a couple of years ago, learned some hard truths in the whole Seek profile land around the formatting of your resume, because what it does is it takes your resume, and if it doesn't like the formatting, it'll and probably so many people don't know this, it chops up your resume, and then it sends it off to the employer if it doesn't like the resume. And so you could be, the CEO of Coca-Cola, and you put your resume through there and it doesn't like the formatting, and it sends your resume off to Coca-Cola with the stuff that you did 20 years ago with the wrong job title mixed with your hobbies. That's how bad it is. So I'm looking forward to sharing, and I can say that because it was actually my own personal experience. So, and I'm in the business, so I can't even imagine what I don't know yet. That's still, I try to stay up to date as I can. But that's an example of how brutal these things can be in terms of if you don't know how the system works. So please, I'm so grateful. Any final questions or comments? Anything else anybody needs?
Sorry, Charity here. I was just checking. How do I assess the
yes. Thank you, Charity. Yes. So what happens early next week? So it takes a bit of time for the recording to download. So I usually just download it on after the session, and then I send it off to the team. They get it usually on Mondays. And then what happens is SCU Careers team, they probably sent you a reminder this morning. They send the YouTube link to this session in there. Once you've been in there into the YouTube, you'll be able to see the other recordings in there. Then also at the end of the whole series is that we bundle up everybody that's enrolled in all of the, and I don't care if you don't, like if you want to come to next week and you can't come, you'll still get the whole collection. So we email the whole collection of slides. Just bear in mind that either try to listen to the recording at some point in time. The slides that they're useful, but you get kind of the whole picture a bit more if you listen to the recording, or if you can come along here, give yourself that 2 hours. I know how hard it is to make that time for yourselves. So a few different ways access it. So after the session, you'll get the recording early next week, and then you'll get the slides at the very end. And then also what I'll do at the end is I'll send you all out an email, and I'll have some time slots of when you can, if you want to come and just meet with me, talk through your own personal worries, circumstances, career coaching, whatever it is that you need, career decision making. Then we've got some one-on-one sessions for that too. All right. And then also the careers team are there. Susie's amazing. She's in Lismore, but she does remote. She normally comes in at the beginning, but she's just on leave at the moment. And you've got Joe in Coffs Harbour, if anybody there, and then a few other really good team members at the Gold Coast as well. So they're there to help you, after this, and we all, sing from the same hymn book, so to speak. All right. Anything else? So please use those resources. Does that help, Charity?
Yes, that's helpful. I will look forward to the email on Monday.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Anything else?
And I really want to explore that one-on-one. So
yeah, last week's. Yeah. If you find like you can probably, we did spend a lot of time, I think I went a bit too slowly talking about values and at the very beginning, but I've really come to realize this myself. And as I said, I try to share, the things that I learned by watching others and watching my own actions around this. The more you really try to find out who you want to work with, what is the best thing for you and your family and your circumstances for you, your best working life, then that might sound a bit sort of like dreamy in the climate that we're in, but I'm talking about longevity for well-being, that, we might find an employer that pays really well, but then you burn out and then you've got to, you lose a couple of years because you're out for health reasons or whatever. So if we can think a little bit more long-term about our future and how we do work and look for work that fits and is in line, and again, that might seem a bit sort of dreamy, but I don't believe it is in any shape or form, then you're likely to enjoy that work. And then when you're enjoying things, you naturally in positive psychology is that you'll find things that you enjoy more, and then you'll find more things that and so it opens up, and in terms of well-being, that increases positive emotions, etc., etc. So spending that time to not think of yourself as a new graduate or too young or too old or not enough experience in Australia or time out of the workforce for family or children or whatever it is, flipping that and thinking about, hey, I've got a lot to offer here. It doesn't have to be big-headed, but to not undervalue what you have, and then think about how you collectively can contribute. And that's why that study is really interesting, the VIA character strength study, because it looks at the human condition and looks at that we all have these strengths, and we are best when we're working on those. So thank you, Lewis. Yeah, so take good care, everybody, and please drop in next week. You're welcome, even if you want to drop in for an hour, come in and out. I'm happy come in to ask questions, if that suits you as well. I'm much happier that you come, turn the camera off and do the washing. I've done that, and so do however it works for you to get that information, or you save it for another time. All right. Thanks, John. See you. Take good care, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Thanks, Paxum. Thanks for coming. See you. Take care.